I read this week that in the city of New York, 40% of the pregnancies end in an abortion. 40%. When you look at the statistics across the United States and the location of abortion clinics, they're located in major states along the coastline, major cities, where you have a wide variety of communities of different races, backgrounds, minority communities by and large. You look at the number of abortion clinics throughout the middle portion of the United States, and you don't find very many abortion clinics at all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 or so in a variety of states across the Midwest. But East Coast, West Coast, that's where they're at. Minority communities, a lot of times. In fact, when you look at the rate of abortion, you find that in the minority communities, the rates of abortion are quite high, particularly among the African American community. It's a rather shocking thing to see this, and it is encouraging to see some within that community standing up and saying, enough. No more of this. The children of all of our families are precious. Each child, of whatever race, is made in the image of God, and its life is sacred and should be preserved. And there are families who will take in unwanted children and provide them with a home. There is no need for this activity in our nation. There are many families that have a hard time conceiving children. They are without children at all for one reason or another. There is a congressman who has gone to the United States Capitol from, I believe it's the state of Illinois, maybe Indiana, maybe Iowa. One of the I's. In any case, he grew up in a farm community. His family was a farming community. He went off to law school eventually and has served in the state capitol for a number of years. He and his wife were unable to have any children. That didn't stop them. They've adopted 4 children of different races. And he's coming to Capitol Hill with a determination to put an end to abortion services, and particularly federal funding of abortion in Planned Parenthood and other organizations like that. Good for him. He stands as a model for what can happen. There are homes for all children, in whatever circumstance they come into the world in. The prophet Isaiah speaks of this image of the barren woman, the woman who has no children. And in that day, the consequences of barrenness and also of widowhood were far more severe, perhaps, than they are today. For it was the children who would be your social security net. Your children would rise up and provide a home for you in your elderly years. And so when a woman did not have children, if she did not have a husband as well, then her circumstances, her financial circumstances, were quite dire, under considerable stress. And so Isaiah makes use of that image to describe his nation. The events that were to come their way with the invasion of the Babylonians, the depopulation of Judea, particularly Jerusalem, the slaughter of many, the wiping out of that city, destroying its temple and destroying its kingly line. its exploitation of its people was so devastating that Isaiah compared it to a woman having no children, to a woman being deprived of her husband, of being a widow. All these rather conflicting images all coming together here to in some way express the great sense of abandonment, loss, dread that came over the people of God when they looked at what happened. For any of those who were of true faith in those circumstances, they looked at these historic judgments on their people, and they must have wondered, what is God's purpose? Does God still have a people in this world? Or has the whole hope of redemption been utterly cut off? The temple is destroyed. The line of David has been removed from its throne. The theocracy is, for all intents and purposes, ended. This was a major, devastating event. The consequences of it were unfathomable for the Jewish believer. Isaiah captures the feelings of the people of that day with these images of the woman without children, without hope of a future, without the joy of children laughing around her, without the comforts of a husband to provide for her, to protect her. She is open and vulnerable to all kinds of attacks, and her future is bleak, to say the least. While describing that earthly city in these words, sometimes we may feel like we are in a similar circumstance, that God has in some ways abandoned us, that God is distant, not hearing us. Certainly our personal experiences do not have the same depth of despair as occurred at that time, but there are moments in the Christian life when God seems to be distant, far off, unresponsive. Isaiah talks about how God, for a moment, drove his people away in anger. But he wants to give a word of encouragement to them. That these moments when God comes in judgment on his people are then followed up by the amazing display of his love and compassion. The overwhelming compassion and love of God, which far surpasses the expression of his wrath. As a parent, you know something of what that is like. There are times when your child just gets you upset. The child just does something very wrong, and you become angry. And you might apply the rod of instruction at the seat of learning. But that moment of anger and fury, it shouldn't be fury when you discipline your child, but anger, will soon pass with that more fundamental commitment of love for your child. And you will welcome that child back in his tears and embrace that child and show that child that you love him or her. And you care for him. In a similar fashion, God cares for you, his church. And though there may be experiences in your life where you feel that God has driven you away, when he is distant from you, when things are not going the way you had hoped, nonetheless, he continues to abide as a compassionate, loving, gracious God. This is what Isaiah wants to impress upon us. The great grace of God that far surpasses those moments of affliction that we experience in this life. Isaiah wants to encourage the church of his day and the church of every age that God's purpose for his people is not frustrated by their sin. In fact, his purpose continues to go forward. And he has great plans for his people. There is a great future for the people of God. And Isaiah begins that by crying out to the church that they are to sing. Sing, O barren woman. Sing for joy. What barren woman would sing for joy? Why sing? That seems incompatible. By what reason or on what grounds would a barren woman sing for joy? And then Isaiah uses something of paradoxical language, which we talked about in our Wednesday Bible study a little bit here. He says, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband. What? How can the children of a desolate woman, isn't that a contradiction in terms, the children of a desolate woman? How can they be more numerous than a woman who has a husband and a family? Well, obviously Isaiah wants us to think and to see what God's purposes are, which are amazing, which go against outward sense, which go against our own ordinary expectation of things, because they are spiritually minded and they are empowered by the living God, the God who describes himself as a husband to his people, the Holy One of Israel, the Redeemer, the God of all the earth. With these descriptions, Isaiah tells us about the God who will do something so marvelous that a desolate woman will have children, and that her children will far surpass the ordinary way of having a family. Isaiah is speaking of the prosperity of the church, the people of God, how the church would flourish, even though there would be periods of time when the church would undergo, if you will, decay, desolation, and would seem to be very small. Here Isaiah speaks of a time which is of such great desolation that he compares it to nothing less than Noah's flood. Incidentally, Isaiah here indicates that he believes Noah's flood actually occurred. There was a worldwide devastation of a flood which took out humanity, and Noah and his family were spared on an ark. So many years later, Isaiah the prophet, under the inspiration of God, confirms what Moses had to say long ago. Nonetheless, Isaiah goes on to say, the events that are to come, when the Babylonians will come through and sweep through Jerusalem and devastate the city, will be much like that day in terms of its desolation. It will be so mind-boggling to see what is going to take place.